Bullshit!
Last time on the I Call Bullshit show, the aftermath of Reconstruction. The North and South reunite. Guess who gets forgotten? Blacks leave the South to work in the factories of the North and find a new method of exclusion. So get ready, boys and girls, for its racism bullshit, part 4. The National Recovery Act of 1933, also referred to as the Negro Removal Act, though its stated goals was non-discriminatory hiring and equal minimum wage for whites and blacks, the NRA public works projects rarely employed blacks and maintained racist wage differentials when they did. Blacks were either excluded or forced to organize in separate unions, such as the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Black workers who tried to organize often found themselves a target of lynch mobs in both the North and the South. In such times of crisis, many turned to God. But for black people, as one would imagine, this was even a difficult task. I mean, where was God in this? Since slavery, blacks were taught that the white God of mercy sanctioned their condition. New ideas formed. Marcus Garvey, an immigrant from Jamaica, a political activist who traveled through the Caribbean, South America, and London, he founded the Negro Improvement Organization in his home of Jamaica, and being heavily influenced by both Booker T. Washington's ideas on economic nationalism and Pan Africanist theory, Garvey truly did come to America in a whirlwind. Noble Drew Ali, born Timothy Drew in North Carolina, founded the Moorish Science Temple, a nationalist organization which had some interesting features. Drew Ali taught his followers that they were descendants of the Moorish Empire, Moroccans living in America, which is important not only because of the relationship between Moors and Europe historically, but also because it was Morocco who was first to recognize the United States autonomy from the British Empire. Ali was first to challenge the color caste of the segregated United States. Both Garvey and Ali were able to organize blacks politically and economically, providing a sense of purpose to some blacks who had all but had it stripped from them, creating a consciousness of pride in a group that had received nothing but hard times. The culmination of these ideas would become the Nation of Islam, headed by Elijah Muhammad. Muhammad taught black supremacy in a series of veiled, somewhat mythological writings called the Lost and Found Muslim Lessons. This form of Islam, as was the case with the Moorish Science Temple of America, was a fundamentally different form of Islam than the faith practiced in other parts of the world. Black people were for the first time given a black God who came for the salvation of black people. Black people were gods. And whites, well, they were the devil. Blacks, whether considering themselves part of these more radical groups or the more conservative groups, were instilled with the newly inspired sense of self-determination. In a country where you are counted as 10 to 11.1% of the population, if you want to get political change, as was the case during the 19th century and the abolitionist movement, making an appeal to outside the country and to members of the majority, advocacy becomes an important tool. The black church, just as it was for the slave uprisings, as well as for abolitionists, the churches again take a pivotal role in the civil rights era. Of course, the most renowned, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, of which Martin Luther King was spokesperson and co-founder of, using peaceful resistance, which in the light of the incessant fear of black violence towards whites, we'll call that the Nat Turner effect. Nonviolent resistance, though endearing, was met with an almost visceral response. Brutality not only from law enforcement, but from the U.S. citizenry alike. Perhaps the sight of what would have been deemed a pack of Negroes, no matter how pleasant, may have brought to mind ideas of Bookman, Toussaint, and old Reverend Nat. Who knows? Perhaps the influence of D.W. Griffith's Ode to the Ku Klux Klan which would have, by that time, permeated into the collective consciousness of white America. I mean, the movie made over $1 million in 1910. Maybe the threat of economic instability. Again, the perception that blacks would encroach on what piece of America they had gotten for themselves. The idea that blacks posed an economic threat to whites as a means to keep poor whites from unifying against the ruling class has always been effective, even today. It was also the time when one of Elijah Muhammad's brightest students rises as national spokesman for the Nation of Islam. Born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska, the son of an outspoken member of the Garvey's UNIA movement, was killed by whites when he was 6, and his mother placed in a mental hospital when he was 13, after which he lived in a series of foster homes. In 1946, at the age of 20, he went to prison for larceny and breaking and entering. While in prison, he became a member of the Nation of Islam. After his parole in 1952, X quickly rose in the ranks to become one of the most renowned members of the Nation of Islam. He was responsible for one of the largest membership recruitments in the history of the organization. In 1957, he had gotten national attention after members of his temple had witnessed a black man being beaten by the police. When they attempted to intervene, shouting, "You're not in Alabama, this is New York," one of the officers turned on them, beating one of them so severely that he suffered brain contusions and subdural hemorrhaging. All 4 African American men were arrested. Malcolm X and a small group of Muslims went to the police station and demanded to see Johnson. Police initially denied that any Muslims were being held, but when the crowd grew to about 500, they allowed Malcolm X to speak with Johnson. After ensuring Johnson's safety and considering the situation to be at an impasse, Malcolm X stepped outside the station house and gave a hand signal to the crowd. The Muslims silently left, after which the rest of the crowd also dispersed. One police officer told the New York Amsterdam News, "No one man should have that much power." The Nation of Islam rattled the notion that whites held regarding blacks' ability to organize. Malcolm X, a divorce from the egalitarian ideology prevalent in black activism up to this point. The Nation of Islam weren't against segregation. In fact, they believed in separation. They weren't proponents of the equality of all men. Though they did believe in monogenesis, they believed the human origin where blacks were the original people and were whites were mutants, not those kind of mutants. It's a result of ancient scientific experiments to create a mischievous race who were unable to live amongst non-whites in peace. Though these beliefs may seem fantastic, can you blame anyone for their attitudes who joined the Nation of Islam during Jim Crow? Was the treatment they had received since 1705, which worsened after the Emancipation Proclamation, justification for the negative perspectives they had about their fellow Americans? All right, boys and girls, that's it for now. We'll catch you next week. Have a good night. Or good day. Whatever.
Bullshit!